Okay, so welcome to Breaking into Sustainability ESG 101, what actually keeps sustainability professionals employed and where you actually fit in. So, I am Faith Missick. I am the trainer, teacher, owner, breaking into sustainability. I've been in sustainability 5+ years now. I've been on the in house side, which is actually working for a corporation. And now I'm actually in consulting, so I work with different companies throughout different industries, and I help them with sustainability reporting. So, what is ESG and sustainability? So, I'm actually going to explain sustainability first before we go into ESG. So, sustainability pretty much encompasses everything that you would think of in terms of trying to sustain the world. So, it actually came from the UN Sustainable Development Goals. So, the United Nations made these 17 goals in order to help the world sustained, so to help us live longer. And so that's things such as climate change, water usage, even the people developments that they were also creating, which would help us live longer. So that's people having access to healthcare, having more developed communities, such as in developing countries, as we say. And so sustainability in the actual concept is the idea of being able to sustain this world a little bit longer. And so ESG came along, environmental, social, and governance, which is the actual metric that you're measuring as it pertains to sustainability. So, in purposes of a career, you can find jobs that will say sustainability manager, sustainability analyst, and interchangeably, it can also say ESG manager, ESG analyst. But I'll go back into the differences a little bit later that may differentiate the two. But so that's sustainability. And so walking into ESG. So ESG stands for environmental, social, and governance. And so when you're looking at these three different words, you're pretty much looking at three different metrics that are being analyzed or being collected. When I say metrics, it's more simplified, is like information that is being collected from a specific company or organization. So we'll start off with the environment. So environmental data or information that is being collected from the companies are things such as climate, emissions, water, waste. So a company's footprint on the planet. So you're looking at that anything that the company actually produces or the company's impacts on the environment are things that you are measuring. So some questions that you may get asked for environmental data is are things such as how much water usage does the company use in order to create a product. So right now, one of the big trending topics in sustainability is data centers, because data centers, we use them for things such as AI, but they use a lot of water for the cooling for the data centers in order for them to cool down. And so it is a big issue now because the water usage is affecting people's towns and their communities, and that's like where they're pulling that water from. So that's more on the environmental side. So you're looking at how does the company actually affect the environment. Climate change is a big one that you may know, because we talk about climate change a lot, and so that is looking more at the emission side. And so how people actually track emissions is pretty much looking at things like your utility bill. So if I relate it from like an organization side to just like you and like your own personal livelihood, how do you impact climate change? You can look at your electricity bill and you'll see how much electricity you're actually using. And then they have emissions factors, which are pretty much numbers that they multiply it by. That has been set up by the GHG protocol, which is an organization that oversees emissions data. And so you'll multiply those factors and then it gives you a number and it tells you how many emissions you're actually producing into the atmosphere that is affecting the climate. So if you go to a sustainability report from an organization, it'll have emissions data in like the appendix, and that is basically looking at how many emissions they're using from a number of different factors. So emissions is a little bit more complicated. If you're somebody that's more technical, you like looking at data, analytics, you like doing more of formulas and calculations, then you're somebody that would be more interested in doing things like GHG inventories, which is trying to understand the company's carbon footprint, is what we call it, is how many emissions they're actually producing. And so that's the environmental side. And then the social side looks at how is the organization impacting people? So how are they treating their employees? This is like your HR. So what does your diversity look like? Obviously, we're in the US, so DEI right now is not something that is publicly, I would say publicly disclosed as much as it used to be. A lot of companies are still disclosing it. However, most of them have pulled back because of the US political climate. But globally, there are actually still a lot of countries that will track social metrics. So, what is the percentage of diversity on your board? What communities do you have operations in? So, companies that have oil are in the oil industry, if they are actually building on top of different reservations, specifically if we're looking in the US, building on Native American reservations, that is an issue specifically like for the organization. Like, how are you helping that land that you just built on, basically, that you just destroyed? What are you doing in order to pretty much like build it back? Or like, what are you doing for like its citizens that live there to help them pretty much move somewhere else or regain their lives? So that is a, and I know like reservations in the US is always like a trending topic too. But a lot of people are not people, but stakeholders do track that to see like what companies are actually doing to impact the society. And so the governance piece is the last piece. So this is really what affects consumers the most. Pretty much the people that are using the services of your company. So how decisions get made in terms of your ethics, oversights, accountability. So this is looking at your data breaches. So do companies have a data privacy policy on their website? Or how many data breaches have they had? But then it also looks at how companies do business with other businesses. So my first company that I worked for in ESG, it was a tech company. So it actually didn't sell its services to suppliers, it sold its services to other businesses. So what policies does it have in place in order to make sure it is doing good business with other organizations? So all of these, the environmental, social, and governance, they all get broken down. And when we say metrics, it gets broken down into a number of questions, which were pretty much the questions that I was just throwing out there. Okay, so I kind of almost reached into this, but I remember I had a slide right after this. So who's actually asking for this data? Like, why do we still have a job? Regulatory is probably one of the most upcoming, I would say driver is what we call them right now, because you have different laws that are coming out that are requiring companies to disclose information. So they're requiring them to disclose their emissions, to disclose how they are treating people, to disclose if they've had any data breaches. And so California right now is the first state in the US that has really pushed regulations forward. So right now they have a regulation that's called like a SB 253. You really don't have to get into the nitty gritty. But just like the overall concept is the fact that they are now requiring companies, like if you have employees, it doesn't matter if you're a public or private, because most of the time, like a lot of these metrics that are being requested are from public companies opposed to private companies. But California was like, you know what? I don't really care if you're public or private. We still need to understand how you are affecting our people and the planet. And so, a lot of private companies, I would say, being in consulting, private companies have a lot of pushback on this because a lot of them have not had to do sustainability, anything sustainability data in terms of disclosing. And so that takes me to my second driver, which are investors. So remember, I was saying that sustainability was pretty much an idea from the United Nations. Investors were the ones who changed the way that companies were seeing sustainability. And so investors started pretty much quantifying how, or what is that? I guess they were pretty much looking at how they were going to invest in companies based off of how they were doing as it pertains to sustainability. So if they had high emissions counts, if they were an oil company and they had a lot of smoke that was going into the air, and it pretty much gave like a whole town cancer, which is like movies about things like that, they felt like that wasn't a company that they needed to invest in. Like, how well is that company actually going to do if it is not having good policies, if it's not treating its consumers right, if it's not doing good business? What is the longevity of the company? So investors are one of the ones that will look at sustainability metrics within an organization. Now, I will say that because it was investor led, that is why a lot of the private companies haven't really caught up to speed with that, because you only had to be a publicly traded company in order for an investor at that specific level to actually be looking at what you're doing when it comes to sustainability. And so they actually have rating agencies that they do. So if a company puts anything out, like any climate targets or any information out disclosing about sustainability, investors have their own scoring system that pretty much will like go through your entire company website and validate and check and give you a score based off of what you disclose. And so that score is actually based off of what your peers are doing. So a lot of this is industry based. However, companies really have to be careful about what they put out, because then it just attracts other stakeholders. And so I'll actually go to consumers when it comes to attracting other stakeholders. So again, if you put something out saying that you are going to be at zero emissions, which is pretty much impossible because you can't literally get rid of your whole production, but if you put something out and you lie about it, obviously the people that are going to be saying stuff most of the time are going to be your consumers. So the people that are actually buying things. Like for instance, if Facebook just all of a sudden they put together a data privacy like policy, but then there was a bunch of data breaches, all of your information got shared all over the internet, your consumers are going to be the first ones that are not buying your products or speaking up about it or giving you negative reviews on a social media platform whatsoever. And so they are another driver when it comes to what are you actually doing for the people and the planet as a company. And especially like this Gen Z generation, like obviously it has definitely been pushing the narrative a little bit more to hold companies accountable for what they're actually how they're actually impacting the people and the planet. And so the last one is the customer. So that's when I was talking about the company I worked for, the tech company. They are B2B. So for the most part, all of your organizations, if they're creating something, then they have a customer. So if you know about supply chain, that's pretty much what we're talking about. So an example would be this water bottle here. I don't want to plug them. But this water bottle here, the actual person that made this water bottle, they had to get they pretty much had to build up a supply chain, because all of these different parts are made from somewhere else. Whether that is raw materials or like it's the packaging and the labeling, they have to have other suppliers that are supplying different items or pieces in order for them to actually make a product. And so, what kind of happens in sustainability is that an organization will have to respond to a law that says they have to report out sustainability data, and they have to respond to investors. And pretty much in that response, they can't fully get a full picture of how the organization is doing without understanding all of these other pieces. So then, not only does this organization that made the water bottle have to respond, but then it needs information about how many data breaches have been from the person that made like the labeling or the cap. They have to understand, it's mostly will come when it comes to the emissions, because climate change pretty much is like the, I would say in my personal opinion, is like the biggest, is the most important factor that I think that people are more concerned about, because you really don't know your full emissions count without looking at your supply chain. So we did an example when I was in school actually, and we had to look at which supplier to go with based off of their emissions. So it was a wine company, and we were looking at different factors like, okay, so we're an American wine company. Should we work with this wine company in America, or should we work in one that's in France? The one in France, they not only have to make the product, but they also have to ship the product, but they have to fly the product. So your airplanes, the amount of emissions that airplanes put out, it's the same way that you're looking at your car and you're looking at gas. Like the fuel that is burning, that is all getting emitted into the atmosphere, and that is also a factor when it comes to climate change. However, you could have maybe you're in New York and it's a shorter distance to fly from Paris or France to New York, but the US supplier that you want to actually get the wine from, they're in Napa, California, and they're not flying, they're like driving their wine in trucks. So it's different factors that companies actually look at to now not only see what the number is in terms of their emissions, but also how do they reduce their emissions, because now regulations are looking at them, now investors are looking at them, now consumers are looking at them. So it's almost like the domino effect that has happened when it comes to sustainability and ESG reporting. Okay, so what are they asking for? So I keep saying people and planet, and pretty much what I've been saying this whole time is just climate change, emissions, water, resources that are pretty much going to be used up, which we already know is being used up. What is the business taking from or putting into the environment? And then the second portion of it is people. So how operations affect employees and the communities around them. So where impact actually lands on real lives. And so what that actually looks like, so the examples I used were emissions. So how many emissions did it take to make one single item? And so that goes into that supply chain that we're talking about. And then water usage on the people side, how much water does a data center actually use? The water is often pulled straight from a nearby community supply. You can actually go on YouTube and see data centers is like literally hot topic right now, especially in any sustainability conference, because AI is literally the future and it's not going away. However, it's a big conflict when it comes to the water usage that it's using in order to cool. Okay, so these are the things that I actually do on a day to day. I report and disclose, which is one part of the job. I plan and reduce. And then the last piece of sustainability, pretty much the role is auditing and verifying. So, report and disclose, that talks a little bit about collecting data, collecting information. So, a lot of the reporting and disclosing, it can be in the form of a survey. So, a customer may have a survey. Literally, they'll literally email the sales team a survey of like 10 questions, and the sustainability professional will have to answer those questions and send it back to them. There are also different platforms that have surveys within them. There are different frameworks that we call them. So most of the questions are the same exact questions, which is actually tiresome. And we call it supplier fatigue, because we're answering so many of the same questions in different platforms when it literally can just be one. The other way we disclose information is in a report. So I talked about sustainability reports. Almost every company that you will go to now, you'll go on their website, they should have something that says sustainability or investors. Sometimes they'll leave reports there, and they'll more than likely have a sustainability report. Some people call it an impact report. They'll have different reports that are stating sustainability data. And so the second piece of it is to plan and reduce. So right now, also what is coming out of this reporting is it's requiring companies to also set targets. So it's not enough for you to disclose what you're doing. You now also need to have an action plan as to how you are going to make your organization better to the people and to the planet. And so we basically normally we do like a gap analysis, which a gap analysis is pretty much, as it is self-explanatory. You put together a number of different sustainability questions that are being requested and see what the company has or doesn't have. So, does the company have a human rights policy? yes or no. If it doesn't, then you create an action plan, which is pretty much telling them what they're missing and how they can actually implement that. So if it's something like a human rights policy, if they don't have it, how do you implement that? Pretty much that is going to your HR or to legal or compliance, whoever would be in charge of that, and advocating basically that you need to create a human rights policy. A lot of times you will go into it with a business case because many companies don't want to disclose this information as to why it's a gap in the first place. So, a sustainability professional, number one, you really need to be a relationship builder. One of my mentors at my former tech company was literally the chief compliance officer or general counsel, one of those. He was at the top because I was able to just form a relationship with him. Number one, we just vibed, but also because I was always asking him for information, and because we were able to build a good relationship, not anything, but a lot of times, if I needed information and I needed a quick turnaround, I can go to him. Other people, not so much. So it's a lot of relationship building. You're talking to people all the time. You're asking them for information when a lot of times this is not like a part of their 9 to 5. Specifically, if you're asking for emissions data, which is probably the most I would guess most work that is outside of your job that you have to do, because pretty much like I said, with emissions data, it's like pulling invoices. A lot of times companies are literally looking at their utility bills. So now somebody who's working in a facility or a distribution operations plant, they're calling their electricity company to send them over a number of invoices. They're looking one by one throughout the year trying to get you data or information. This has nothing to do with their 9 to 5. So it's a lot of relationship building, but you are basically trying to make a case for, hey, we need this information. We need to start implementing some of these different changes. Some of the changes will never get implemented, and it just is what it is. But you do need to figure out, like, okay, is this worth this? Is this like a low hanging fruit? A lot of companies will move and start doing things based off of what their competitors are doing. So I always look at that as well in terms of trying to build a business case as to why we need to move towards a different direction than where we're at. The last piece, which is the newer piece, which is auditing and verifying. So now regulations are not only requiring you to disclose information, they're requiring you to make changes based off of the information you disclose, but then they're also doing auditing. So this is very similar to financial auditing, which a lot of accountants are getting hired right now in sustainability because they are doing a rigorous audit that is similar to a financial audit that you got from like SOX, which is like from the Wall Street scandal, and now companies have to get audited. The companies are working with Big Four, so they're working with KPMG, they're working with EY, PwC, Deloitte. They're also working with some smaller boutique firms to get audited on your sustainability data. So it has become a lot more structured, I would say, in what you're reporting. The data quality has to be really good because now they're looking through all of this information that you are saying that you're doing. And if they flag it, then they're adding that to their report, or they're seeing pretty much where your flaws are and picking apart different things to make sure if they're signing their name on something, then that means that the information is actually accurate. So that is the last piece. It's newer, I would say, maybe the last 2 years, but it is a big factor in sustainability reporting. I encourage anybody that has already started in accounting, if they want to switch a different lane, then ESG sustainability reporting is definitely still something that's going to be around and it's growing. And so I'm almost done. The This piece is just where the data actually comes from. So I touched on this a little bit. So we're collecting data from all over. Sustainability professionals normally are like they have a very high level understanding of what is actually going on in the business. So we are true project managers, and that's why most people have in their titles sustainability project manager, specifically if you are working for an organization. If you're in-house, then you are collecting information from operations, facilities, HR, procurement, finance, and legal. Sometimes you're doing materiality assessments, a double materiality assessment where you're not just looking at financial priorities, but you're also looking at sustainability priorities now. And that requires you to interact with C-suite level leaders to understand where the company is actually going. So it's a lot of relationship building because you are pretty much your hands are in all different parts. Now, when you're in consulting, it is a bit different because you can start off at the analyst level. So the analyst level is doing more of the nitty gritty for the company. So the operations team may not have the extra bandwidth to do any of this of calling the electricity company and looking through invoices. A sustainability analyst, that's when they bring in third parties. They can do that. They'll hire them to do that. Or HR, specifically looking at workforce data. So looking at the percentage of minorities that you have within the company, different things like that. You Companies will pretty much figure out, do we have the resource to outsource to bring in a consultant firm, and that's pretty much how consultant firms started forming when it comes to sustainability data, is because when as it started forming when it comes to sustainability in general, because organizations feel like they were swamped already with the regular 9 to 5s that they do, and now they have to incorporate sustainability. So most of the time, I'm not gonna lie, like, we're kind of the pain in the ass in companies. But if you're like a people person, then most of the times they will work with you. Okay, so the career paths, I basically touched on this sustainability analyst. So you are more so the person that collects and analyzes data. If you look at any consulting firm, you'll see that they normally start at analyst level, but some people like staying at the analyst level. I prefer not to because I'm not a numbers person. However, sometimes if you're in house, I was the sustainability analyst and the manager. So that means I was really doing a lot of the data collecting, but then I was also overseeing the strategy and just how the team was going about in terms of those organizational project management things that would happen as a project manager. So owns the strategy, cross team execution, ESG manager. So that's what I was saying. Like, it's really interchangeable. It can be the same. It can literally have the same job description, but for purposes of this, ESG manager. Anytime you hear ESG, it's reporting. You're looking at disclosure and investor reporting, because ESG specifically came from the investor lane. And then last portion is the third party auditor. So you can also be an auditor and do assurance in a sustainability or ESG profession. So working in consulting, when I don't have a lot of reporting work, I help our data side do assurance. And so pretty much what I'm doing is I'm looking through an inventory or looking through a spreadsheet and verifying that all of the numbers in the spreadsheet are correct while I'm looking at a company's invoice, or while I'm looking at the data that was provided from their operations team or from their HR team. Okay. And so the biggest challenge, and I think this is the last one. The biggest challenge I would say is getting companies to actually share. I have a lot of pushback from legal, a lot of pushback from compliance, because companies don't want to make themselves vulnerable, in a sense where they're just oversharing information, because it allows people to see inside of their operations. It allows other stakeholders to see exactly what is happening, and it's a sense of transparency, which doesn't necessarily align with the risk management all the time. And so it's a balance. It's always trying to figure out, like, where can we, okay, we don't want to say this, but let's try to use some different type of language. But a lot of times we just have to disclose. I worked on a project where the score that we got was not enough. And so I had to go back to legal and tell them, hey, we need this. And this is like one of our biggest customers. The sales team is bothering me and saying, hey, we're not signing with you guys again if you don't disclose this information. And so now we have to get creative about what we're actually going to disclose. But that is always that's probably your hardest part of your job, honestly, is just seeing if you can disclose, if you can get other parties within the company to actually disclose the information that is needed for you. That's the hardest part on the in-house side. I would say the hardest part on the consulting side is being the expert, because it's a lot of different regulations coming out that are new. It's the same information, but sometimes it's just a different style on the report. Sometimes it's longer. Right now, Europe has a very long report, which is pretty much longer than anything coming out of the US, where it is requiring large companies in Europe to do lines and lines of Excel, like pretty much adding in information from one organization. And so I would say that's more time consuming opposed to like it actually being a challenge. But it's really working with different clients, what just comes with working in consulting and just appeasing multiple people. And again, that relationship building with your client is the same that you would deal with in house. But one of the biggest challenges that we talk about all the time is the pain point is getting the buy in from leadership and making the business case. All right, and so we are ready for questions then. Thank you guys for listening. Do you have any questions? Okay, you guys can write questions in the chat or did y'all write the questions in the chat? Oh, okay. I don't see any questions in the chat. Hi, Sarah. Okay. For someone with a, I don't see your full question, Tina.
Let me try to type it again.
Okay. Okay, I'm gonna start with Sarah's then. Typically, how many years of experience do they look for? So, if you're coming in at a sustainability analyst level on the consulting side, which I recommend if you're going into sustainability, is to work at a consulting agency first, because consulting agencies do a number of different services. So it allows you to learn if you want to do assurance, if you want to do more of the reporting side, like the writing the reports, if you want to do more of the data collection side, if you want to do like account management. So it allows you to have an idea of the different lanes in sustainability. And with that, you can actually come in as an entry level person. But if you're coming in more as a project manager, they're going to be looking for 2 to 4 years, and they're going to be looking for if you have additional like skills and just an understanding of different concepts in sustainability. So the different frameworks that they have, um, that are pretty much online that you can have resources you have access to, the different certifications. So I'm certified in one of the regulations, CSRD, which is the one that was saying is coming out of the EU. And so it just kind of depends on what they're asking for. But what I do encourage people is to always look at the job that you want and see what is needed and then work your way towards that. Because even if you don't have necessarily an expertise in sustainability, but you come from a project management background or if you have a PMP, then that is definitely what you would consider some of those transferable skills. Okay, and so how do you balance sustainability goals with business objectives? So it's really making the business case. So understanding what the driver is. So those different drivers, are the stakeholders investors? Is it a regulatory compliance? If it's a regulatory compliance, a lot of times you can't get around it. And so that's when you are pretty much training your organization on why this is a priority right now. If it is a customer that is not budging on the fact that you have to disclose this information, then you're weighing out like, do we really need this business sale or not? So a lot of times you're weighing it out based off of who the actual driver is and what is actually requiring you to disclose the information, and that's kind of how you do the balance with the actual business objectives. For example, when I talked about environmental goals, some companies will say, oh, they're net zero, but they're not like stopping production. They're not stopping operations. You have one alternative called RECs, which are renewable energy credits. And so companies that purchase RECs is because they want to like offset the emissions that they're actually putting out into the atmosphere. So they're not stopping any production, but what they're doing is paying or investing into a specific project, which could be like tree planting somewhere like in the Amazon, which is what our company did, or it's another project that needs investors to invest in them, they use companies that have high emissions in order to invest in their organization that's actually doing something good for the environment. But really the business case is who is the request coming from. Okay, so since it seems like it's already a difficult field to break into. So it's not super difficult. I think that it has got a little bit more challenging as it has grown because right now I feel like companies have a lot of people that are entry level. Like they have the entry level people. And so now they're looking for more senior people to oversee. However, now they do have degrees. You can get a degree in sustainability now, whereas like 10 years ago, when I first started, it was very difficult, like not difficult, it was non-existent to have a degree in sustainability. You could have like an environmental engineering degree or environmental sciences, but it wasn't anything that was specific to sustainability. So now you can very well, I've spoken to, they do a lot of internships. My job hires a lot of people. Even if you're not doing specifically the reporting, environmental health and safety still counts as a sustainability role. So health and safety is like air permitting, or noise, like noise measuring. So pretty much people who work in like facilities, um, are they being affected by the loud noises because they're working with big machines, or are they being affected by the air quality that's within the facility? So those different jobs too, they're still hiring and they're considered in sustainability. Okay, so transitioning from customer success, operations, and SaaS into sustainability, which roles best fit my transferable skills and what makes a career-changing candidate stands out on a resume in interviews? I think what makes somebody stand out is number one is just having a background that kind of fits what they're looking for. So if it is someone so the customer success, for sure, I would say going into consulting because you're working with multiple clients. You're working in multiple industries. They already know you're adaptable and you are able to maintain relationships, which is actually 30% of our job is business development and upselling and maintaining relationships. But on the operation side, I would say you could also go into data because you have an understanding of facilities and how they work, and pretty much you are in the day in and day out. And the storytelling of a facility or operations in the company. And so I think there you could see more on the GHG inventory side, or you can actually do on the reporting side as well. But the SaaS part I want to get into. So I didn't talk about GHG inventory too much because it's a little more technical, but GHG inventory is basically an inventory of all of your emissions. So it's a breakdown of every single invoice for electricity, a breakdown of every single water usage that you have used throughout the year, a breakdown of business travel. It's pretty much broken into three different scopes is what we call it: scope one, scope two, scope three for emissions. Scope one are like your direct emissions. So what are you directly doing? So if you are turning if you are about to mess this up. So if you are actually burning fuel, so an oil company, if it's actually burning fuel in order to make something, that is its direct emissions, which we call like a natural gas. And then your scope two is like your purchase electricity. So if you're actively turning the light on, that's what's going to add to your emissions count. And then scope three is a number of different categories. Your suppliers is one of those that fall into that category, which is what are your suppliers' emissions? So all three of these are a bit more technical, and the archaic or the old way of doing it is on an Excel sheet. Now it's a bunch of different software that sustainability individuals use in order to collect data. So an inventory is pretty much an overall like consolidated sheet of all of that emissions information. And right now, sustainability and tech is like five and six. Like there are so many softwares that are always in my LinkedIn messages trying to sell their next solution. So that I can definitely see somebody going into GHG inventory, And you can specifically look at GHG inventory, or we call it carbon management as well. And you can do that on the consulting side. But if you have all three of those different skills, that all works for as a sustainability project manager as well, because you understand products within which companies will use the actual sustainability product, but then also customer success could also be transferred into working with and operations can be transferred into the fact that you're able to do relationship building throughout the different departments in the company. Okay. Okay. And I think that's it. And that's fine because it's 44 minutes. All right. Well, thank you guys so much for coming to the Q&A. If you have any more questions, please feel free to reach out. And I do have my calendar open. You can schedule a one-on-one with me. And thank you again for joining. All right. Bye. If you're looking to learn more about sustainability, feel free to subscribe to my YouTube channel and subscribe to my school community, Breaking into Sustainability, where you're able to schedule one on ones with me. And I host a monthly live webinar for my community participants. And I also just give you insights from my experience working in house and in consulting. I'm Faith Missick, and thank you for coming to my YouTube channel.